Hey guys, it's Malthus here once again, and for the past few days I've been putting the new lightning tendrils to the test in the starter build that I listed as the Inquisitor with some cast-while channeling arc action as well. At this point the character's level 90, I should have made a video a little bit earlier, but I was kind of hungover from a party. So in any case, I'll give you a too long didn't watch version, and that is lightning tendrils with the rework is pretty damn fun. It's kind of cool. It has decent damage. It probably needs a lot more area to be viable as a standalone skill, because it just feels a little bit bad otherwise. But cast-while channeling arc certainly bridges the gap for that and helps you feel a lot nicer on your overall clear speed, and doesn't really mean that you need any extra area for tendrils too much, because it does its purpose of helping you channel the arc while actually doing some good single target up close. So it ends up giving you kind of a half-half scenario where you have decent clear, decent single target, but you're not amazing at one or the other. And thus, without putting too much into the build, it actually ends up performing pretty well. For map and for clear speed, it's really satisfying. It's really quite fun watching the chains go off, watching the explosions go off from the new chest impulses, or if you don't want to use that, then Herald of Ice will do the trick just fine. It's fairly defensive throughout the mapping process because you are running a Call of the Brotherhood and you're always freezing just about everything out there, and it is fairly fast if you build it the right way with the certain attack speeds and all of that. Overall, it does feel pretty damn good to play, and I'm fairly satisfied with how it works. It is a bit disappointing that Tendrils isn't too much of a standalone in the way that you would have wanted it to be, maybe like a Storm Call, but it definitely performs the same sort of action that I tried with Stormburst earlier in Harbinger League a few months ago, but it's just got stronger overall everything. The single target's a bit better, the clunkiness of the skill is definitely a lot better, and it synergizes, I'd say, a bit better with your cast-while channeling arc. So this is all on a 5 link, and you should be able to see throughout these clips the way that these skills interact. That is to say, the Tendrils is hitting things directly in front of you and doing some pretty good damage in front of you. The Arc also hits in front of you, but also chains a bit further behind you, and gives you that extra bit of clear speed. It's pretty satisfying to watch the chains, and it does seem to do some pretty decent damage while on the cast-while channeling setup together, though it's definitely not as good as if you just got rid of the Arc and went pure single target with Tendrils, and that is with Conk Effect. But up until tier 15 maps, I didn't actually do that at all. I only put in a single target specifically for Atziri because had to, she's got Reflect, and as well as that, the Guardians and Elder himself as well. So it didn't feel too bad to play with, because I was worried you'd have to change your cast-while channeling setup quite a lot into your pure single target with the Conk Effect Tendrils, but that really wasn't the case. The cast-while channeling setup did good enough damage to be good enough for all of these lower tier bosses up till tier 15, as I mentioned, and that's still on a 5 link. If you get a 6th link in there, you know, that's another good 30-40% damage or so, and definitely makes the cast-while channeling viable enough to really not care about going for pure single target. But at the end of the day, when you do want to get down to business, I think you're going to want to go Lightning Tendrils Conk Effect, maybe even a Storm Call. That's not really something I've played around with for single target yet, because I've been fairly happy with my Tendrils action. And the only other sad thing about the skill or setup, I'd say, is that it does take a little bit to ramp up. At level 1, Tendrils has some really flaccid area and you just won't know what the fuck to do with it. So I did end up leveling with Stormcall and Spell Cascade until, 20, maybe 30, and by the time I got cast-while channeling, I could play around with Ball Lightning, I could play around with Arc, and both of those felt fairly decent for leveling, and that's probably when I started benching the Stormcall setup. Now I will go over what I did to build the entire character, the changes I made as I went, and especially changes towards the starting setup I actually showed you guys about a week ago. But just first of all, I did want to show you a quick demonstration of single target, and that is against the Elder in a tier 10 map. I got the Guardians and Elder to spawn in tier 10 through to 12. So the Guardians were all, they were a little bit challenging in the tier 11s and 12s in the red maps, but overall I only died maybe once or twice to each Guardian at worst, and that was still kind of a learning experience of the Guardians themselves. Likewise in Elder, I still mess it up quite a bit that you can see here, but the damage is fairly respectable for a 5-link. It's not really performing too badly. Our sustain largely comes from just a life flask, the consecrated flask for regen, a stone golem, a rejuve totem, all just kinds of regen stuff, and as well as that, a cast while damage taken, or cast when damage taken, Warlord's Mark that gets put on the boss, and you do a bit of leech there as well. So you won't ever really be able to purely face tank and just take hit after hit after hit with the instant leech like we're used to, but you can survive long enough to get to a bit of safety, recover a bit more, and dive back in. So the character kind of falls a bit short at defenses in the complete endgame, because largely our defenses in the clearing sort of aspect of the game is just being able to freeze everything and kill everything instantly, and as well as that have some decent defense against, life and fortifying all of that against the content. When you're against pure single target, it does hit fairly hard, flasks do run out, and it does feel a little bit average compared to the old meta of just pure life leech action. But even though it's not as good, it is still good enough, and I will go over exactly what it did to make this character for this stage. So the character is completely based on the starter build that I showed you guys, that is a Lightning Tendril Inquisitor. By now it's level 90, it's called Finally Got a Fridge, because I just got a fridge and it took a damn while to get it. And overall, there's nothing too particularly special or different from the character I outlined, except for the fact that we were toying around with the idea of Pious Path and Mind Over Matter. And after playing around with that a bit throughout the process, I just decided it wasn't really too worth it unless you're actually running a Essence Worm ring comboed with your Call of the Brotherhood. So if you wear both, that means you can unreserve probably most of your mana and then actually get some good Mind Over Matter action happening. But in my current setup, I just couldn't really justify Mind Over Matter, because I'd have to lose Wrath or have something like 50% mana unreserved, and my regen really wasn't good enough without even more mana investment and all of that. So you can play around with that idea. Pious Path was actually very nice to use for a while. I did play around with it. It's great for the mana regen, it's good for the attack and cast speed and all that. And if you're going CI or some shit, then the energy shield regen's really nice too. Overall, this is just a little bit more damage to go Augury over here and Instruments over here, and I just completely reserve my mana without worrying about Mind Over Matter instead, and this has been totally fine, at least for mapping especially, because our defenses are good enough, and we just freeze pretty much everything you attack with the Call of the Brotherhood, so it's fairly safe to map with overall, as you should have seen throughout the clips. So it is, in the end, still built like a traditional caster Inquisitor was back in the day. That is just, life, decent bit of life overall, spell crit, and instead of going for Vile Pact, down here you free up a few points, and you don't really worry about leech as much. So in the end, we are just trying to regen with our Stone Golem, with our Rejuve Totem every now and again, but it's mostly the Stone Golem doing, we're sitting about 260 life regen per second. Drop the Totem as well, and we're up, something like close to 10%, not quite, but close to 10% regen per second. And as well as that, the interaction for the Pantheon system over here, which is right here, still works really nicely. If you have Soul of Arakali and you've captured Arachnoxia, if you've never tried this before, it's pretty amazing. So you get 50% increased recovery rate of life and energy shield if you stop taking damage over time recently. So when you run Blood Rage, which I do pretty much always, and then your Immortal Call with cast when damage taken procs, it will mean you stop taking damage over time recently, and you get that huge boost to your rate of life and energy shield recovery, which does also include your leech rate. And I suppose there are a few other new additions to the build over the traditional one that I would have played. You do have, or I have been using, a Warlord's Mark with cast when damage taken support, so that just gets us our extra bit of leech and mana leech whenever you take some damage. I forgot to level it though, apparently. I have grabbed a pair of Shaper gloves, so I found these myself. Ideally, I'd say you're just going for a pair of gloves with life and cast speed. So that's not too hard to achieve. and then they also had some dexterity. But as well as that, mine ended up rolling level 18 blind. So I did put my Orbis Storms in here, and it's a 6-link Orbis Storms at this point, which means I have 18% chance to blind enemies on hit, and that saves you the use of a Stib Knight, for example, and it's pretty reliable for helping get defenses out. So you can go something like this. It does go pretty nicely into the setup for defenses, and so overall that means I'm running my Orbis Storms for blind, for power charge on crit, for the Arcane Surge, and a bit of damage as well. Whenever you drop your Orbis Storms as you charge into a pack, it will quite often just freeze everything and be your sort of first line defense, sort of. And then on top of that, I'm using Impulse's Broken Heart. Now this is, considering I am using Cold Brotherhood, it's not terribly necessary for the explosions and all that, so I'm not really using it as such, except for a neat little graphical effect. It does, however, have 48% damage if you've shocked recently, and 32% increased effective shock, and a bit of life. So overall, it's a pretty nice chest. It doesn't have to be the only chest you can use for this build, but it does go nicely, and it does give you a nice little effect when you chain your arcs and pop all these corpses and all that. So that's pretty damn cool. And then you can use this belt from level 1, which I did, and it's pretty damn nice to level with because you can put no level required jewels in here, and that ends up helping you level quite a lot. But at this point, they're high level jewels that I got, and we tried to go for life, and then a bit of spell damage, or damage to spells rather. So lightning, cold, fire, doesn't really matter. We're an Inquisitor, so we benefit from all of them. But a bit of life and a bit of damage, and overall this should be the highest possible damage you can have from a belt slot, because otherwise you're just getting some life resists and potentially flask duration or reduction and all of that. So I thought this was a nice little belt to use. So if you can get the right jewels for it, then it does work out well, I'd say. That's probably all for sort of new nifty items. You can get a nice Shaper dagger going. I didn't manage to craft one too special, so I just got a pretty regular caster dagger. Just a bit of attack speed goes a long way for your shield charge, so don't forget that. Some damage to spells, some spell damage, and some crit. And then I tried to get a bit of cast speed and life on a diamond ring, cast speed and crit multi on a neck. That's pretty important for your damage. The Call of Brotherhood, of course, so you can convert some of your damage into cold and then actually freeze things. Some cast speed, if you can get some crit or some damage onto your shield too, but cast speed I think is the most important for our build. And then just life on a helm. Bought this one for something like 10 chaos, or 20 chaos actually. It's surprisingly cheap. Managed to get Stormburst damage, unfortunately enchanted on that. But I will, obviously have the gear for you guys to look around at. There's not too much else to mention, I don't think. Running Clarity, Herald of Thunder. Herald of Thunder is not terribly important, so you don't have to run it if you're really low on mana or squeezing that out. And I did have to grab a few nodes to help out with my mana regen, so once you get a 6th link, it's going to be a lot harder, and you will start to have to fix that up with potentially some mana regen on gear, or maybe some more unreserved, or maybe go into the entire Pious Path route. That's not really something I have to worry about on a 5-link at the moment. Besides that though, the only other thing I should mention is jewels. Try and get as much crit multi as you can from your jewels. I got life, crit multi, and attack and cast speed from my jewels for the most part, but you can also try and just get pure crit multi, a bit of attack and cast speed. Does go a long way to filling out your damage. If you don't have much crit multi from your jewels, you're not going to come anywhere near this sort of damage. And speaking of the damage, currently sitting at something like 400k in the single target setup at level 19. That is with Tendrils, Crit Strikes, Controlled Destruction, Conk Effect, and Added Lightning. That's pure single target without too many qualities or anything. A level 20 by itself makes a very big difference. And then you can see if you go into a 6th link, we are looking at maybe 700k if you run early focus, which you probably should do for actual endgame bosses. But up until the actual endgame bosses, you do get a lot out of the shock because you will be shocking a lot of things, and it's also more effective thanks to your chest and all that. So, shock does bring that up quite a bit against a lot of different targets, though obviously not the really big beefy ones because you probably won't be shocking them too often. So that's when early focus does come in. 700k, as a pretty modest Inquisitor, I think is definitely not too bad. And overall, once you actually do start attacking the big bosses, you're probably better off going into an Atsiri Flask instead of a Quicksilver, which is going to be another big damage boost as well, so keep that in mind, but you will be a bit slower charging around and all that. I would say for now though, that's all I really need to talk about on the character. If you're leveling it, I started out over here, grabbed the area, went straight through the Witch, grabbed the area, and then went straight into the Shadow area. Pretty straightforward, kind of levels itself. Try and get the crit as much as you can, as quickly as you can, as well as the area to actually feel good about your skill. I did level quite a lot with the Stormcall. If you can turn this entire thing into a Stormcall build. That's totally fine as well. I will quite likely still have another video about the Elder Guardians and maybe some more Elder action as I try and spawn him more into higher depths and all that, and as I try and get my gem up to level 20. Maybe another video about this guy, but I will be looking to start something else pretty soon as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.